Joseph Campbell sometimes said that these stories are more than true. You know, it's not about them trying to be historically true or trying to be, true in a way that the, scientists can prove it. But there's something to them that is more than true. And Joseph Campbell actually once said that, many of these stories are like a finger pointing towards the moon. And so many of us become obsessed with the finger. We're just staring so hard at the finger, and it's like, no, they're pointing towards something wondrous. And we don't want to get caught up in the literalization of the finger because we miss the glorious thing that is being pointed to there. And in some ways, when we insist these stories have to be historical or literal, we rob them of their power.
I agree. Welcome, everyone, to the Spiritual Forum. I'm so glad you're here. I just want to remind you that this podcast is a voice of hope, inspiration, and awakening. And today we're going to be getting all three of them from my guest. And feel free to subscribe to my newsletter at thespiritualforum.org, and you'll learn about my retreat. And I've got a blog there and all sorts of things. And just interact with me on the YouTube channel and subscribe there as well. So my guest today, I'm so excited, is John Bucher. He's a renowned mythologist and story expert who's been featured on the BBC, the History Channel, the LA Times, the Hollywood Reporter, and now the Spiritual Forum podcast. And many other podcasts. He serves as executive director of the Joseph Campbell Foundation. I'm a big fan of Joseph Campbell, and he's a writer, storyteller, and speaker. John explores mythology as the stories we use to make sense of the world around us. And who doesn't want to do that? He's consulted and worked with government and cultural leaders around the world, as well as organizations such as HBO, DC Comics, Paramount Pictures, Nickelodeon, A24 Films, Atlas Obscura, and the John Maxwell Leadership Foundation. He brings deep understanding of cultural narratives and myth to a wide array of audience. And he's also the author of 6 influential books on storytelling. Welcome, John.
It's such a treat to be with you today, Carol. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, I'm so excited about our conversation today. I've always been really interested in mythology. I wanted to tell our audience that we're going to do this in 2 parts. The first part is the importance of mythology and storytelling, and we're also going to delve into the hero's journey, which many of you know I talk about a lot on this podcast. And the second part will be specifically about the Christmas story and its meaning from a storytelling standpoint. And this will be coming out in early to mid-December, so it's perfectly timely as we explore the Christmas story ourselves in our own spiritual life. So, John, you said that you would play with the rapid fire questions, so let's get that going. First, can you share at least one person in your life who you say is influential?
Boy, there are so many people that
No.
are influential, certainly. But I think I'm going to talk about one person very briefly, and that is my mother. My mother gave me perhaps the greatest gift that anyone could have ever given me, and that is a love for storytelling and for stories. She spent so many years, sitting at the foot of my bed, reading me stories, telling me stories about our family, and it was just such a wonderful, wonderful gift that made me fall in love with storytelling.
Oh, that's perfect. That's a perfect story. Okay. Now, this is also going to be one of those that you probably have a lot of them, but can you share a favorite mythological character?
Yes. This is a little easier, believe it or not. I really love the character of Persephone from the Greek tradition. Now, Persephone, for people who may not know exactly who Persephone was, she was the character that Hades came along in a chariot, swooped her up, takes her down to the underworld, and her mother, Demeter, makes this negotiation with Zeus that Persephone can live half of the year up on the planet, with Demeter, her mother, and half of the year she has to go to the underworld. This is how the Greeks explained winter, because Demeter was the goddess of the harvest and of vegetation. And when her daughter was taken to the underworld every year, she would cause the plants to stop growing, and she would let frost come over all the earth. And this is how they explained when it got cold in the wintertime. And I've always just loved that story and thought that it was so rich, and there's just so much there.
Oh, good. Oh, that's a great one. Thank you so much for that. Okay, now this kind of capitalizes on your first answer. A favorite childhood story.
Oh, I really loved the story of the Billy Goat's Gruff when I was a child. There was something to me that was just so magical about that story, and about the idea of a troll that lived under a bridge. And, when you're a child, of course, you think, well, maybe trolls do live under bridges.
Maybe they do.
Maybe they do, right? I also was fascinated by billy goats. I thought, and maybe, I've never thought about it until today. Maybe it's why I grew this little billy goat beard. Maybe that's why. I don't know.
That's it, John. I think that's it. You really wanted to have it. You wanted to make it a biography.
Right.
That's so funny. I haven't thought about that story in so long. So I've got to go look that one up again. All right. Well, thanks for playing. All right. So let's start with talking about mythology and how you got interested in it, what it is, and why is it important today?
Yeah. I think a lot of people misunderstand mythology. I think a lot of people, hear that word and they think of something they studied maybe in grade school that was about these very strange gods and goddesses out somewhere, that that are kind of weird and a little bit scary. I define mythology this way. I define mythology as the stories that people have told to try and make sense of the world around them. And so often, we encounter things that we don't understand. And, in ancient times, of course, the things people didn't understand were like why it got cold and why the seasons changed and why certain people acted certain ways, and so people told stories at that time around, what they were experiencing and the questions that people had. I think we still do that today. We still create stories around what we don't understand. But do you think that's true? I feel like it might be.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think about a lot of the movies we watch, like The Matrix. It's a great story to tell about why is our world the way it is.
Yeah.
How are we programmed to do what we do, and why do we prefer to have problems in our life versus have just a lovely, problem-free life, things like that. I think all of our movies also are stories that we tell. I think you're right though. People think mythology is like this thing that was a long time ago, Odysseus and all that stuff. These are the Zeus and all of them. This is thing that people a long time ago who weren't as developed as we are created these silly stories around how things worked, and isn't that interesting? And yet I think we do it all of the time now.
Yes.
Well, Superman, Batman, all those stories. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, yeah, Superman, Batman, but even our own lives.
Yeah.
Because I'll give you just a real quick example. I could tell you, I really love my wife. And you could hear that and say, oh yeah, John loves his wife. But if I told you the first time I saw my wife's eyes, my entire world changed. And one Christmas morning, I asked her to come with me to Paris, France. And we got on an airplane on that day and we flew to Paris. And that night, I took her to the top of the Eiffel Tower and I went down on one knee and I asked her to be my bride. You have a much deeper understanding of my love for my wife
Right,
than if I were
right,
to just say, I love my wife.
right, right. And there's a whole richness to that. And I'm there with you. I was wondering if you're going to be the Eiffel Tower or on the bridge, the bridge where everybody puts the little locks on.
Yes, yes, yes.
Yeah, storytelling
Yeah,
is so important, and
yeah.
I know we ancient peoples, we envision them being around the campfire and telling stories about whatever, however things are, or how we came to be here, and Thanksgiving. This is going to come out after Thanksgiving, but Thanksgiving for me is next weekend. For us, next weekend, and there's going to be storytelling there. Yeah, I like to tell stories about my kids and how they were when they were growing up. And when I was a kid, I loved hearing stories. My birth story, I loved hearing my birth story and telling that over and over again. And little kids will
Yes.
say that. Tell me again, Daddy. Tell me again, Daddy.
Yes. I love my birth story too. It's so funny you mentioned that because maybe 2 weeks ago, I asked my mother, was I born at 9:42 at night or 9:47 at night? Just because I wanted to hear her retell the story of
Yeah.
when I was born. And isn't it interesting that we ask those questions because I think we're looking for some deeper meaning in how we came into the world.
Yeah.
I think we're so curious about what we're supposed to be doing here and who we are and these questions of identity that we want those details of things we don't remember. And
Yes.
I think that's a part of it, you know?
Yeah, it is interesting, the origin story. And, we're going to do the Christmas story in the next episode, but I think about the origin story in the Bible of how did this all come to be? It is also a mythological storytelling, very, very much like, the stories that they told in Greek and Roman mythology. Just as a quick aside, I was an 11-pound, 23-ounce baby girl.
Oh, that's a story. What a character you were.
And this is in the age when the fathers were all out in the waiting room, and
Yeah,
it's like
yeah.
all the fathers are out in the waiting room waiting for their wives to deliver, and they come out and they tell them, Mr. Saunders, you're the father of a proud father of 11-pound baby girl, and the story goes, all of the other dads were like, "What?" And they all had to go and come see me.
You came into the world with presence, with something that
With
that
weight.
caused with weight.
I came in late. I was
That's
I
right.
was 3 weeks late, so I really liked the womb.
Yes, yes.
So, but it is funny that that's a story that I like to hear. Um,
Yeah,
okay, so we've established that storytelling is interesting. Do you
yeah.
think that in today's world, where there's just a lot of video games and a lot of screens telling us stuff, do
Yeah.
you think that we're losing, or that there's some opportunity to regain our ability to really appreciate the story?
I feel like we've never completely disconnected from our deep connection to storytelling, that we still use it, whether it's through, video games or movies or books or even just conversations that we have with each other. I have this friend who has a theory that story is like the operating system of the human brain, that we process everything through story. And I think my friend is right because I live in Los Angeles. I deal with terrible traffic all the time.
You do.
And oh yeah, it's shocking, right?
I've been there.
Yes, yes, we do. And whenever I'm driving and someone say cuts me off in traffic, I am shocked at how quickly I will form a story about that person and say, oh, they are probably just a very selfish person. They might not have been raised well, and they might even kick their dog. And, I just
Yeah.
come up with all these crazy things because my brain is trying to make sense of why someone would do that to me. So I create stories around them.
That's really interesting. It's such a natural thing. I've always find that my husband and I always have different stories about the person who's cutting us off or the person who's going too slow. The person who's going
Yes.
too slow, he gets really
Yes.
frustrated with them. And I'm thinking, I tell a story. I'm like, maybe their cat just died and they're really upset about it. And the
Oh,
reason, and they're doing their best driving and staying on the road. Or maybe they just got some really bad news about grandma.
oh, it's
So
precious.
yeah, I tell these stories about that because I remember being in some of those situations where I'm just, not able to drive because I'm sad or something like that.
Yeah.
But I think the point is that we do create, this is a unity teaching, one of my
Yeah.
ordinations, we do create our experience of reality through the
Yes.
stories we tell, through the thoughts
That's
we
right.
have. And
That's right.
you can tell a positive, hopeful, inspiring story
Yeah.
about someone or some situation, or you
Yeah.
can make it a tragedy,
That's right.
or something where you're projecting and blaming and all that stuff. And then your experience of the world, yeah, two different things based on the story that you're
Yes.
telling.
That's a lot of my work. I, um, along with the work I do with the Joseph Campbell Foundation, I have an organization called Telling a Better Story. And that is really dedicated to the idea that even when a story is difficult, or sometimes I don't even know what a good story is or a bad story is. I don't know if you've had this experience, but sometimes in my life, what I thought was the worst story unfolding, I learned the most from. And sometimes what I thought would be the best story ever I could have, it ended up being the worst story. I don't always know what a good story or bad story is, but I do know I crave and desire a better story. And I think maybe that's common ground we can find with everyone is we all want a better story.
Yeah, and I think common ground is something we need to be looking for in a very,
Yeah,
very divisive and very, very, very strange world that we're living in, where everyone's
that's right.
very identified with some
Yes,
group or something or
that's
some
right.
ideology, and everybody else is wrong. So, how can we use story and
Yeah,
mythology to make sense of the world around us? Then,
yeah, absolutely. Mythology and story really are pathways towards empathy. And once you learn someone's story, it's really a lot more difficult just to dislike that person on simplistic terms. When we learn who someone is, when we learn what their story is, it changes the way that we think about them. And we tend to see people not so much in binary terms. Our brains are meaning making machines, and they crave certainty, and they want to know, is this person good or bad, or are things black or white? And so rarely is the world like that. So a story allows us the opportunity to sort of pull apart our assumptions, of either this person's good or bad, or this situation is black or white. And it allows us to consider the wholeness of a situation or the wholeness of a person. Because if I'm honest, sometimes I've done bad things and sometimes I've done good things. And I hope I'm not defined by any of that, but I hope that people might encounter me in my wholeness, in my imperfections, as well as the charming things about me that would cause people to consider, John's a human being just like me.
yeah, yeah. Oh, I think that's the field beyond good and bad that Rumi talks about. My last guest talked about that's where we'll meet. We'll meet on the field where we can listen to each other's story and not just each other's political views or how they view reality, but like who are you? And yeah, if we could come to that place if we could come to that place where we can listen to who each other is and listen to just each other's stories, there's so much power in that. So do you do that? Do you do that with
Dude,
people?
I do. I tell you, I've had the deep privilege of going around the world, and I've spent time in more than 50 countries. And one of the things that I do is I have the opportunity to travel is I do a lot of listening. I do a lot of listening to people's stories. I'll tell you, I often, in every country I go to, there's a few questions I always ask. One of the questions I ask is, what stories do you tell your children before they go to bed?
Uh-huh.
I am amazed at the commonality of a lot of the stories. One of the things I've discovered, I have yet to visit a culture or a country that doesn't have some version of the Cinderella story.
Mm.
Now, the details change and the characters change, but there's always a similar story to the Cinderella story, and I think that's because something within us deeply wants to know that I can move beyond my station in life, that there's more possibility for me than maybe what I was given or what I was handed. And that is something we all need to be able to believe about life. So I think, this is what myths do is they tap into something that is universal and that is true on a much deeper level than maybe what history or facts offer and provide. There's a spiritual truth to myths that when we hear them and when we encounter them, it rings true in a part of us that has nothing to do with our brains. It bypasses the head and goes straight
Mm.
to the heart.
Mm. Yeah, Cinderella, I think about those stories that I grew up on. I remember the Rodgers and Hammerstein Cinderella movie. It was on every year on the network TV. I can't remember what channel it was, but it was such a delight to sit and watch that and hear that over and over again.
Yes, yes,
Yeah,
absolutely.
and I
For
think
me,
it
it was The
also
Wizard of Oz.
Wizard of Oz. So much
Yeah.
symbolism in that one. Of course,
Yes.
now
Yes.
Wicked is out, so
That's right.
that's
That's
being
right.
retold in a really fun way. But I think like Cinderella is also, of course, little girls love the princess thing. Like anybody can be a
Yes.
princess. I can be a princess. I can be a princess. That's a big deal. And
Yeah.
also that I'm not a victim of my circumstances.
That's right.
The wicked stepmother and stepsisters and all of that. And she's delightful in the presence of that, which is mildly annoying, but certainly a role model for how to be in the
Yes.
face of oppression
Yes.
and then not
Yeah.
be victimized by it. And these are things
That's
that
right.
grown-ups could really learn from that story.
Absolutely. It's interesting because the great thinker Albert Einstein said, if you want to have children of great substance and character, read them fairy tales. And this is, I think, what we miss is assuming that fairy tales, myths, folklore, that these are the domain of children, that these are things that really are of only concern to children. But I've found that the simplest stories are often the most profound. They have the most to say to me.
Yeah.
I try and listen to children's stories because I'm often reminded of the deep truths of life that I overcomplicate in my modern world.
Well, I think sometimes those stories are almost better for grown-ups because there's a scariness to it. Many of
Yeah,
those fairy tales, there's a real scariness to it,
for
that
sure.
there's a crazy grandma or, wolf's gonna eat you or,
Right, right,
there's always a no mom or no dad or,
right,
Bambi's
right.
mother gets shot,
Yeah,
there's so much
yeah,
tragedy. And I think I
absolutely.
remember as a child, I had a much more tender heart as a child than the world has hardened my heart in some ways, not near like I was when I was a child. I was so saddened by some of those stories. And I think some people would probably think that those stories are too harsh for children. Um,
You bring up a really interesting point because there's been a lot of psychological debate on what is appropriate for children when it comes to fairy tales. And there are certainly different schools of thought about it, but there's one school of thought that, believes that maybe children actually need some of these slightly harsher stories, that it actually helps with their maturation and seeing the world as a more complex place. And I think there's certainly always lines around that and nuance that's required. But I do think that adults easily dismiss these stories thinking they're just for children when actually they have just as much to say to adults as they do for children.
Yeah. Yeah, probably more. And a really good story can be received in very heartfelt ways by all generations. I remember going to the Shrek movie, and
Yes.
we took the little kids, and they laughed in some places, the grown-ups laughed hilariously in other places. And the whole thing, we all came out with probably like a different experience of that movie, but it was so
Yeah,
nuanced at many, many levels so that
that's right.
everybody could get something out of that story.
That's right. That's right. I find that when I go see, the Pixar films like Toy Story and Finding
Yeah.
Nemo, and there's usually just as many adults in the theater as there are
Yeah, yeah.
children because they've mastered that art of communicating something to children that adults really get just as much out of.
Yeah,
So,
they have mastered that, and thank God, for
yes.
that, yeah. So, given that the world is somewhat nonsensical,
Yeah. Yeah.
somewhat crazy, we've talked about how story can bring us together and how
Yes.
story can help us with how to live our lives if we really
Yes.
look at them as something that has those kind of metaphysical themes that speak into us rather than dismiss it as child's play. I'm really interested in, we're gonna get to the hero's journey in a minute, but what does the Joseph Campbell Foundation do? And can you tell us a little bit about Joseph Campbell for people who don't know who he was?
Absolutely. Joseph Campbell was a person who was very curious about the world, and he studied all the different myths and religious traditions and folklore. And he wrote a book in 1949 called The Hero with a Thousand Faces. And it was a book where he observed all of these patterns and motifs that seem to be rising up in all these different stories from around the world. And he said, there's a lot of similarity here. We keep seeing these same characters, these same motifs over and over again. And later, people started referring to that work he did as the hero's journey. Now, we at the Joseph Campbell Foundation, we're very interested in continuing to, bring his ideas forth in the world. But our mission statement is we invite people to experience the power of myth, because we believe that there is something special that happens within someone when we actually experience myth as opposed to just hearing about it. And I think that myth can be experienced in such a wide variety of ways. I have felt that sense of awe and wonder staring at a waterfall. For some, that experience of awe and wonder first happens inside the doors of a church as they're given the Eucharist. And for others, that experience happens as they experience the story of Hansel and Gretel being told by their grandmother and them relating to the depths of that story. But I think when we experience myth, as opposed to just hearing a story, it reacts in our nervous system. And that's really what we are so interested in, is what can these stories, these rituals, these ideas lead us towards when it comes to human flourishing and the world being a better place the last thing I'll say about it is we have since learned, in the foundation that there have been scientists do studies around the impact of these kinds of stories on people's mental health and their happiness. And there's a particular study just done a couple of years ago by Dr. Benjamin Rogers from Boston College, where he studied a wide sample group of people that seemed to see the hero's journey as being active in their life, the experiences they had being like a hero's journey. And those people reported actually greater levels of happiness in their life's experience. So there's something to the sense making or meaning making of our lives and being able to organize areas of our lives into story form that is deeply personal and deeply meaningful for us.
Well, I'm a unity minister, and in unity, we look at the Bible metaphysically, allegorically. There may be history there too, but I think we would say that the richness of the story, if you look at it as actual fact, you're missing the richness of the story, and that the whole
That's
story,
right.
like the New Testament story, as crazy as it is, and there's a lot of violence and war and all sorts of stuff,
Yes.
and you know, there's a lot of stuff
Yes.
there
Yes.
that if you look at it literally, it's like, God is really a very mean being. Telling people, Yahweh is telling people to go invade this and, rape and pillage. And
Right.
I mean, it's really there. And
Yeah.
and there's giants and there's all
Yeah.
sorts of
Yeah.
things, unicorns, there's all sorts of
Yeah.
things. And then so we would say that the Bible is the story of the evolution of human consciousness and the spiritual
Yes.
journey of humanity.
Yes.
And there's an origin story in Genesis, and then bringing it through all these phases, the flood and onward. And David and Goliath, what a great story that is. So there's
So
so many
good.
stories in there that really
Yeah.
is about us, and you
Yeah.
place yourself in the story to find
Right.
what that story was about. And I do not know this, but I think that's what those stories were intended to be in the first place, rather than kind of this flat literal thing that this actually happened in history,
I
but there was
agree.
some fantasticalness to it.
I agree. I love that you brought in the David and Goliath story because
Yeah,
I feel like that is such a perfect example. It doesn't matter to me if David and Goliath ever actually existed. It
right.
just doesn't. The power of the story is knowing that sometimes in my life, I feel like I'm this small little creature that has to go up against these giants. And the idea that, oh, you know what? The giant can be defeated. That is a gift to me. That is so beneficial in my life. And Joseph Campbell sometimes said that these stories are more than true. It's not about them trying to be historically true or trying to be true in a way that the scientists can prove it, but there's something to them that is more than true. And Joseph Campbell actually once said that many of these stories are like a finger pointing towards the moon. And so many of us become obsessed with the finger. We're just staring so hard at the finger, and it's like, no, they're pointing towards something wondrous. And we don't want to get caught up in the literalization of the finger because we miss the glorious thing that is being pointed to there. And in some ways, when we insist these stories have to be historical or literal, we rob them of their power in
I
many
agree.
ways.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I agree. And I think that's kind of an affliction of modern man, that we think in
Yes.
some way that we're superior. And
Yeah.
so we think these people in ancient times telling these stories are, something lesser than, and they're getting the meaning. We're not.
That's right.
Think more about
Exactly.
David and Goliath. For me, what it inspires, it's the little guy versus the uh, unimaginable big thing that it's such a hurdle I can't imagine getting over. There's that.
Yes.
There's also, to me, just the message that the conventional way of doing things, when you have an adversary, whether that's an adversary within you or outside of you, the conventional solution is not the way to go. There's
Yes.
something more clever that you can employ. Somebody else may employ the big bazooka, or the big huge club or something. But if you're a
Yes.
little tiny thing, you've got to be more clever. And so there's a cleverness to how we can accomplish overcoming these big Goliaths in our lives. That's another part of
100%.
the story, or another meaning I get from the story.
That's so good. I'm encouraged by your interpretation of it. Um, and I think that's the power of the story is you are going to see something in that story that when you share it with me, I'm like, oh, I resonate with that. And I think that's what these mythical stories do is they don't narrow down our view of what's happening in the world. They open it up,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and a really good story. You could be in another place entirely in your life 5 years from now and look back at that story and see a whole other angle that you hadn't seen before. And suddenly the
Yes.
story becomes about that. And then another 10
Yes.
years, you can look at the same story. And there's
So
some stories
true.
like The Hero's Journey, we're in that a
Yes.
lot. We're in that a
That's
lot.
right.
And my
That's right.
favorite Bible story that I tell from the standpoint of your own journey is Moses bringing the Hebrew people out of Egypt's enslavement into, quote, the promised land. And everything that happened in between is what happens for us when we go from some sort of enslaved state. And I don't mean that literally. It could be something, a bad relationship, a bad job, something that's really not working for us, to something
Yes.
new. All of the stuff that happens in that story in between
Yeah.
is the journey that we're on. And we
Yes.
can't get to that new thing unless we
Yeah.
spend the quote 40 years in the
Yeah.
wilderness figuring
Yeah.
out who the heck we are.
Yes, yes. Well, I love that you have brought, the story of Moses in here because there are elements of that, as you mentioned, that really align in interesting ways with the idea of the hero's journey. I'll give
Yes.
you a short example. One of the stages of the hero's journey is it's called the call to adventure.
Yeah, I want you
And
to go
in
through
the
all the
call,
stages. So you
Okay,
want to do
yeah,
that
I
now?
will. Well,
Okay.
why not? Why not?
Yeah.
We can
Okay.
we can kind of pull some
Yeah.
things out here. So the hero's journey begins with this idea of the normal world, right? This is the place where the individual finds themselves, and it's all they know. And one of two things happens. Either someone says, you know what? I'm really bored with this world that I'm in right now. And I just want to get out. I'm either really bored or I'm suffering. I'm suffering and I've got to leave. So we think about in the story of Moses, the people who were enslaved making bricks for the Egyptians, all day. That normal world was a pretty painful place to be. So this call to adventure happens, right? Where Moses comes and says, we're leaving. We're going to depart. We're going to go have this grand adventure where we're going to go to the promised land. Well, Joseph Campbell says the next thing that happens is the refusal of the call. In other words, you start out on the journey and you know what happens? You say, I think we had it better back in Egypt. I think I'd rather just go back.
Yeah.
I'd
Yeah.
rather just go back. And just to pause for a moment, I think this story is powerful because I have lived it so many times. I have wanted, a new job. I've disliked the job I was in. My normal world was just so boring. I want this new job. And so I get a call to adventure. I'm invited to step into this new job. And 3 months in, what happens?
Wish I was back in the other one.
Exactly. I just wish I was back in that other
I knew
job,
that
right?
one. I knew how that one worked.
right. Because it's such a universal experience that we end up wanting to go back to what we disliked, before, because going forward is either so scary, or we're just not able to see the unknown can be such a troublesome place. So in the hero's journey, then someone engages the road of trials, and there's all these problems that end up happening. So with the people going across the desert in this story, food becomes a real issue,
Yep,
right?
yep,
Food
yep.
is a problem. There's not enough to eat. And in the hero's journey, some supernatural aid comes into play at this point. Well, in this story, manna is rained down from heaven, right? So the divine gets involved. And when we think things are impossible, suddenly, out of nowhere, the miraculous introduces itself. Manna is rained down from heaven. Now, we without going into detail on each stage, eventually we get to this place that we're really wanting to be. We get to the promised land. We get to this, what Joseph Campbell called the boon. It's this treasure we've been seeking and fighting to see. But at that point, the journey's only half over.
Yeah.
Because then it is the job of those who have received the boon to bring it back to the community, to bring it back. And we see this even in some sense with Moses bringing the commandments down to the people, and then first, destroying them and having to go back and get the commandments again and
Yeah.
bring them down. But there's this act of needing to bring back the boon to the people, or what the divine has given us. We have to bring it back. And what's great about these types of stories is the mythic cycle then insists that they all start over again.
Yeah.
And it's a cycle. And that's why I think we see, once the story of Moses is done, we see other characters step into that role. And these mythic stories, the mythic cycle just returns over and over and over again.
Yeah, it is. It is our own personal journey too. Now, isn't there? If I remember right, I'm not an expert on the hero's journey, but I thought at the bottom of the circle there was something like the cave or something like that, where
Yes.
you had to
The belly of the whale.
the belly of the whale. So we need to talk
Yes.
about that, because that's an essential
that.
part of the journey.
Yes.
If we're going to get to the next phase or whatever
That's
is
right.
calling us, we got to
That's
sit
right.
in that space.
That's right. The belly of the whale is such a key stage, because what has happened is you have crossed a threshold. This is a language that Joseph Campbell uses, of crossing the threshold, and you step into this new phase where there's no turning back. You can't go back to what you had before. You have no choice but to go forward. And the darkest thing, that which you were most fearful of, comes upon you. You end up in this dark cave, this belly of the whale, which Joseph Campbell was alluding to the story of Jonah when he talks about the belly of the whale.
Another
And
great story.
another great story of someone who receives a call to adventure. Go to Nineveh, right? And what does he do? He refuses the call, just like Joseph Campbell said would happen. Says, I'm not going to go to Nineveh. He ends up in this dark cave, the belly of the whale. The divine makes itself known. He's vomited up on the beach, and he eventually goes and brings the message to the people of Nineveh. But that dark cave, Joseph Campbell talks about being a place of transformation.
Mm-hmm.
It's liminal space between what has been and what is still to come. And it's often the place that we feel the most like giving up. We feel like, I can't even see the light of day. It's complete darkness around me. And it's in the belly of the whale that the divine often meets us when no other possibilities seem to even, be on the horizon. It's almost a mystical work that happens in that innermost cave. It is where what has been happening unconsciously inside of us suddenly becomes conscious and manifested outside of us. And when this happens, we experience a transcendence, we experience a transformation, and the arc of our journey begins to change. That which we might have been using as a crutch, we can now cast aside. That which so easily beset us, we can now step away from. We start to recognize that this which we sought, which we needed so much, it was inside of us all along.
Yeah.
We talked about the Wizard of Oz earlier. Dorothy
Right.
receives that message at the end, right? You had it what you needed inside
always
you all
had
along.
it, right? Yeah.
You
Same thing with
always
the
had it.
alchemist. The alchemist, his
That's right.
treasures back home.
That's right. That's right. Exactly
Yeah.
right.
Yeah, and again, this story we can find ourselves in this story. We can find ourselves in the story if we're in the process of stepping into the call to adventure, because a lot of us don't even take that step, but we're always
Right.
called to
That's right.
adventure. And I
That's right.
love that refusal of the call. I think about the times where I've had divine inspiration, honestly, and
Yeah.
I'm like, no, got the wrong person. Kind of like Moses in the burning bush. Not me,
That's
not
right.
me.
That's right. That's
Nope,
right.
not me.
Yeah.
Don't make me do
That's right.
that.
Don't make me do it. Don't
And
make
then
me do it.
and then there could be
Yeah.
this huge breakdown, this huge cracking of the heart open and kind of a
Yeah.
wailing, and oh my gosh,
That's
I've
right.
got to do this.
That's right. That's
Yeah,
exactly right.
yeah,
Exactly right.
yeah. I started a church as a hero's journey. I
Hmm.
started a church from scratch, and it was a divine
Yeah.
idea. It was a call to adventure,
Yeah.
and there were
Yeah.
several times where it was like, oh, not gonna do it. Even the day of my very first service, before it
Yeah.
started, I walked out the door and I
Oh,
I kind of said, God, I
yeah.
don't have to do this.
Yeah.
I'm free to not do this. And it was
Yeah.
such a revelation for me because then it was such a choice for me to go back in the door and do it,
Mm,
you know?
yes, absolutely. I think you bring up something so interesting about so many of these mythic stories is we are still given the agency to make the choice.
Yeah.
And it's only after we recognize that we have the choice that many of us feel like we have the courage to make that choice. And sometimes it's after that time in the belly of the whale that we decide, okay, I'll go to Nineveh. All right, I get it. I
I
get
got
it.
it. I got it. I got it. But
Right.
it is something to really become familiar with. So if anybody's listening that doesn't know about the hero's journey, really delve
Yeah.
into it because it's the journey that we're always on, and
Yes.
we evolve to a certain level, and then we're kind of hanging out here for a while, and then that's our new our new Egypt then.
That's right.
And then we're called to adventure
Yeah.
again. And
Yeah.
it doesn't have to be an actual adventure out there.
That's right.
It
That's
could
right.
be just learning how to integrate something in my past, some
Yes.
trauma, or
Yes.
learning how to become a better person, or learning how to do
That's right.
self-care. Whatever it is
That's
that
right.
people are afraid of, whatever is the Goliath in your life,
Yes. Yes.
that we're called to an adventure to transform that, and we go through those steps. But that
That's right.
waiting for that divine intervention, that's a
Yeah.
great step because we really don't
Yes.
do it on our
Yeah.
own. Yeah.
That's right. Well,
Yeah.
Joseph Campbell said that the cave we fear to enter holds the treasure that we seek. Whenever we see that scary place before us, it often does require that inner journey of going within ourselves and saying, what is it that I am really fearful of here? Am I fearful that I am not enough? Am I fearful that I'll be abandoned and left alone? What is it that I'm truly afraid of? And when we confront that, I think we often find the treasure that we seek. We find what we're looking for.
Yeah, and as you were talking, I was thinking about the stories about, the white knight and the black knight and
Yes.
the battle the battle that we think is two people out there, but it really is
Yeah.
kind of within us.
Well, I tell you, there's a type of storytelling that I am quite fond of, and it's the fable. And not a lot of people talk about fables. We sometimes talk about parables, and we sometimes talk about myths and fairy tales, but not enough people talk about the fable. Most people, the only fable that they recognize is Aesop's fables, and many of us had to read that in high school. But one of the most famous fables that Aesop told was the story of the tortoise and the hare.
Oh,
This
yeah.
turtle and rabbit. And most of us today, we hear that story and we say, "Oh, so I should be like the tortoise. Slow and steady wins the race. Don't be like the hare that gets lazy and goes to sleep up near the finish line." But when Aesop's contemporaries heard that story, they understood it slightly different. They understood it as, inside of me is both a tortoise and a hare. And sometimes I find myself rushing to the end and becoming lazy. And sometimes within me, there is this tortoise that slow and steady wins the race. And it's the tension of the opposites there that they most deeply understood inside of themselves, rather than trying to say, I'm either the tortoise or the hare. They didn't think in terms of binaries in quite the same way that we do. And again, I think it's why these stories have so much to offer us today.
Well, I think that all of the characters and stories are within us, and you're right. We tend to identify with the protagonist. Like you watch a film. It to me, it's always interesting watching a film, and you're for the protagonist, even if he's a German Nazi, because you're in his life and his perspective, and his woes and his challenges and and
Yeah.
his joys, and he's a real person to you, so you're on his side.
Yeah.
And it's
Yeah.
so easy to flip that, but all of the characters, I think, are in us.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah. Joseph Campbell once said that all the gods are within us. Because in a sense, when we think about these mythological gods, of let's say Artemis, who was this goddess of the hunt, who was this strong, woman, that sometimes that energy is, within me, or Athena, who was this goddess of wisdom. Sometimes that goddess, is within me, and I find myself feeling that energy, of Athena. So I think when we think about these gods and goddesses as archetypes, that we feel like energy is poured into these containers, and sometimes that energy is poured into this container, into me. I think it gives us a different perspective on these mythic stories.
Well, it does, and it also helps us understand ourselves.
Yeah, it
You
does.
know,
Yeah.
you were talking about the hare. In the story I look at, that's the most like the hare is Winnie the Pooh with Tigger.
Yes.
Tigger,
Yes.
who's always bounce, 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 bounce. and how often I'm Tigger,
Yeah.
and then Eeyore, who's just always like, oh, life just sucks. Sometimes I'm bad. And then this Piglet who's always afraid. Sometimes I'm that. And then this owl, who's like
Yes.
Athena,
Yes.
very, very
Right.
wise.
Right.
And,
Yeah.
and Pooh is kind of like the Zen character. And then who am I missing? I think Rabbit. Rabbit's the one who's
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah.
always busy and always building
Yeah.
things and,
Yeah. And
always
Christopher
worrying about things.
Robin.
Christopher Robin. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Those are great, great stories.
So good. So
And
good.
and all of those characters are
Yes.
within us.
That's right. That's right. It's true.
Yeah.
It's Carl Jung talked about, when we have a dream, that every character in the dream is us,
Yeah.
right? That we are seeing all these different selves. And I think the same is true of stories, that every one of those stories is within us. I grew up, with Star Wars, and I somehow, even at an early age, recognized Luke Skywalker is within me, but so is Darth Vader. All these characters are within me.
Yeah, so is Darth Vader,
Right.
R2D2.
Right.
Yeah, Obi-Wan Kenobi.
They're all there.
Other great stories. Yeah, so stories and myths help us understand our world and help us understand ourselves and help us walk courageously the hero's journey and identify. This is what I like about the hero's journey is when I'm in the muck or, wherever I am in the cave or the belly of the whale or wherever it is, just knowing the story, knowing what the hero's journey is, I can say, oh, I know what's happening. Here's where I am on the map of
That's
the
right.
hero's journey.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
there's a certain ease that happens. And it's like, oh, okay.
That's right.
Now I know why life seems so hard right now because
Yeah.
I'm in this part of the
That's right.
journey.
Yeah.
And I just got to kind of move my way through it because I'm gonna go to the higher level of consciousness or the promised land, whatever we want to call it. What does he
Yep.
call? What does he call the end of the journey?
Yeah. So he gives a couple of different stages here at the end, and one that he gives at the end is called the Master of Two Worlds. In other words, we're able to master the inner world and the outer world, and we're able to bring unity between the conscious and the unconscious within ourselves. And so I think that is in some ways such a gift to us if we can recognize where I am and my circumstances are no longer what's going to drive my inner experience. That I think is the way that the hero changes over the course of the journey is we learn that transcendence is about transcendence of our circumstances in this world, that we're not a victim of these circumstances. We're not bound by them, even when they seem impossible, that the path forward is going within and finding ways to reframe and walk through until we're in a different stage of that journey.
Yeah, which brings us back to Cinderella.
Yes. Yes.
What comes to her age are all the little animals and the fairy godmother and
Yeah. Yes, absolutely.
yeah. It's not just about the ball.
That's right. That's right. And it tells us we don't have to go through the journey alone, that there are these, Joseph Campbell refers to this stage that we have helpers and guides and mentors that come alongside of us. And that's so true of our lives. If we look, Mr. Rogers once said that if we look, the helpers are always there. Look for the helpers. Yeah.
Yes. It is not a lone journey. The belly of the whale seems very solitary, and there's probably something there that's just the inner part of the journey, but we do have helpers along the way.
We do.
What a great story, a great model for the life. I think that Joseph Campbell was such a gift to the world. Yeah.
He was.
Yeah. Okay, so we're going to go into part 2 soon, but is there anything else that you think we should know about mythology, storytelling, Joseph Campbell, the hero's journey, that will take us into our next segment?
I would love to maybe conclude my thoughts around this just by sharing one of Joseph Campbell's other famous sayings that I think helps us begin to put these pieces together. And he often was asked this question: what's the meaning of life? What does it all mean? Right? And Joseph Campbell very famously said, not sure that people are so much looking for the meaning of life as much as they are the rapturous experience of being alive.
Oh, man.
I love that.
That's amazing.
I love that because I think there's so much truth to it. When we have trouble making sense of our lives, when we have trouble putting all the pieces together in a logical order or trying to say this happened because of this, I don't know that we ever fully get a great amount of satisfaction from finding meaning in every little aspect of life. But I think our joy comes from that rapturous experience of being alive. And you know what? I want all of it. I want the joy, the pain, the good, the bad, the happiness, the sadness, because it's only in knowing the fullness of life that I have that experience of being alive.
Well, and I think that what you just described is a call to adventure, because I think a lot of people are afraid of that. What is it? Rapturous? What is it? Rapturous what?
The rapturous experience of being
Experience
alive.
of being
Yeah.
alive. The rapturous experience of being alive. I think it's something that a lot of people are afraid of.
Yes.
You know,
Yes. That's
easier
right.
to sit on my bum, watch Netflix, and eat McDonald's or whatever it
That's
is. And
right.
I'm not being critical of people.
No.
I'm not.
No.
I really get that this is something that people are afraid of, being fully alive.
That's right.
And if we were fully alive, that would solve all the craziness that's going
That's
on
right.
in the world.
That's right.
That would, these things that we think matter wouldn't matter.
That's right. That's right. We would stop shutting ourselves off to things, and we would step into a type of empathy that we're pursuing the good of all of us.
And listen to each
opposed
other's stories.
That's right. That's right. Oh, yes.
Okay. What a great conclusion to this one. I think I just cut you off. Is there anything else that you wanted to say there?
I am just sitting here with so much joy and gladness from this conversation. Again, thank you for inviting me into this conversation. This is just really a joy.
I think so too. It's so fun, very organic. And I can't wait to tackle the Christmas story in our next session. So thank you, John, and thank you everyone for listening. And I now close this segment of the Spiritual Forum.